Having climbed the rugged passes of the Turkish mountains, Tim Severin and Sarah Dorman camp with their 3 horses, Mystery, Sacho and Zippy, in a forest on the road to Antioch. The 3,000 miles they have followed on horseback, the exact route taken by Duke Godfrey de Bouillon almost 9 centuries earlier on the First Crusade to Jerusalem.
After more than 3,000 miles on the road and the grueling crossing of the Taurus mountains, I was beginning to appreciate just how weary the original Crusaders must have felt, and most of them had been on foot. By this stage, perhaps 80% of their animals had died of heat, poor feeding and exhaustion, and Sarah and I decided to proceed by easy stages.
Zippy, the pack pony, has been suffering from a deep abscess on his back, but is responding to antibiotics. But at this stage, it is not certain whether he will be able to continue the long trek. Retracing a march that brought medieval Europe face to face with the Muslim East, Tim Severin and Sarah Dorman have already spent 7 months in the saddle, traveling from Duke Godfrey's castle almost to Antioch on the borders of Syria. Many of the first Crusaders, the ordinary men, women and children who accompanied the knights and foot soldiers, died of disease on the plains before Antioch. Ironically, history will repeat itself.
Well, yesterday morning when we woke up, Mystery was lying on the ground. Didn't seem in any great discomfort, but she's been a little bit off colour the last few days. We thought it was a stomach problem. She's had several. And we rode on very gently. We decided that the best thing to do would be to keep exercising her at a very slow walk and stop every 45 minutes for half an hour, as much as an hour in the shade.
By the end of the day, we were just outside the nearest town where we could actually reach a vet. Well, I decided, I just looked at Mystery and I thought, she's really ill. But as long as she was breathing, there was always hope. And I desperately hoped that even if she couldn't travel any further, that we could save her and at least put an end to her suffering.
Somebody get the call right now and then get a bloody vet.
Yeah. I think so. We turned up and we found a campsite, and it was the other side of a small stream, and she walked into the stream, again didn't take any water at all, scrambled up the bank on the other side and lay down. Come on, Mystery, get up. Get up. Mystery, get up. Get up. Come on. Get up. Get up. I'm bitterly disappointed for the fact that of all the horses, she was the one that was going to make it. She was the best traveller. She'd come the furthest. She was the best suited for it all. She was fit, she was well looked after, she was being well fed, and she just had the bad luck to pick up a fatal disease, and really a killer disease. It was just unpreventable that she should suddenly be struck down.
While Tim arranges for Mystery to be buried, Sarah rides the last few miles to Antioch alone. The harsh realities of the Crusade journey have taken their toll, and if Tim and Sarah are to go on, they must confront the necessity of replacing their most valued companion. Now the Turkish city of Antakya. Very little remains of Antioch's former glory, except the ruins of the famous citadel and the legendary curtain wall with its 365 towers, one for every day of the year.
When the Crusade arrived, I think they were probably stunned by the difficulty of taking this city. They had got here in October, and in fact, the siege lasted 7 months in which they tried to starve out the defense, completely unsuccessfully in terms of reducing them to any hunger. In fact, it was the besiegers on the outside who grew hungry. They ran terribly short of food. A lot of people got disheartened and began to leave. It was the winter months, it was rainy, it was cold. It was one of the worst periods of the whole crusade. They were drenched, they were hungry, and then they heard that there was a huge Turkish Arab army coming to lift the siege, and that was the point at which they had to break into Antioch and themselves use Antioch's walls for their own defense.
In Antioch, we had to set about finding a replacement for Mystery, which in effect was impossible. It was rather difficult to track down a horse which had previously had a saddle on its back. Subsequently, the horse dealers tried to fob off their carriage horses on us, which were really unsuitable.
At this moment, I'm not interested in that sort of thing.
You don't think we could?
No, I just think that we're going to have to find out what makes him go better. And it sure as hell not that bit.
Bu böyle gel olmuyor. Olmuyor.
Normal.
Ya.
Şimdi bu et çok yumuşak. Çok yumuşak.
Ne bileyim vardı ya sattık. Ama ne geleceklerini ne bileceğim. Yoksa eyvallah buraya sat.
Well, I think it would be interesting as a control to ride another horse.
Try a different horse.
Yeah.
Ağır gel ağır. Ağır koştuk oğlum. Bunlar koşuya girmeyecek.
Kahraman hayvan.
How old is the horse?
Kaç yaşında?
4-5'e gidiyor. Nerede arabaya koşulur her tarafa ya.
The selection was very narrow. The quality of the horses generally was very bad. I mean, at this part of the world, they really do overwork their horses, which at least meant that any horse that we chose would be quite fit.
Sarah's not.
If you want to travel from here to Israel in that pace, I certainly wouldn't want to.
Also, I think a mare understands.
Fortunately, in some of the woodland on the hills surrounding the town, they do have horses which transport charcoal. So we inquired about these, and these ponies really are not considered the finest animals. A lot of them are probably breeding mares who are not considered with any great value.
So I would say she's only 6. I would have said 5.
This is the point at which the Crusader army broke into Antioch at the end of its 7-month siege of the city. And the way that they succeeded was to make contact with a disaffected captain of one of the most important watchtowers, the Tower of the Two Sisters up on the hill behind us. It was a man called Firuz, who had been a Christian, converted to Islam, but had kept in touch with his co-religionists. And it was arranged between Prince Bohemond, one of the Crusader leaders, and Firuz that 60 knights would climb up the wall, enter that tower, then spread along the wall, drop down and open the main gate. And that's how it turned out on the night of June the 2nd. Just the 60 men got the gate open, the army poured in, and within that 12 hours, every Turk, it is said, within the city had been massacred, and Antioch was in the hands of the Crusaders.
Within the Turkish Muslim city, a tiny Christian community still survives.
It was a hollow triumph. The Crusaders found there was no food left in Antioch, and within days they in turn were bottled up by a Turkish army which had been sent to relieve the city. The besiegers had become the besieged, and Crusader morale plummeted. Eventually they decided to risk everything on one last throw. Virtually the entire Crusader force sallied out to confront the Turks. They had so few horses left that some knights rode donkeys and oxen. But in what seemed to them a miracle, their desperate courage won them total victory against all odds.
We had seen this mare in the stable, but taken no notice of her. She looked pretty battered and very abused. You know, this ill-fitting harness and saddle on her back. I think they left it on her back for 24 hours each day. She just looked like she'd come out of a war, or I don't know. She'd been wrapped up in barbed wire for 10 years. Her legs were pretty bumpy, and we thought, well, we can get better than this. And it ended up that she was extremely comfortable and sensible. And, you know, when we took everything into consideration, she seemed the most likely, she'd been the most abused. So whatever treatment she got from us, it could not be worse.
Tamam. I've only got enough for one set. I'm going to have to get mysteries, an old set of mysteries, and knock the pins out for a spare set. If he understands all that.
Tell him to stop.
No, it's got to reshape the shoe. It's just...
You mean you can do it again?
No.
The special requirements of shaping the heavy-duty shoes, which are essential for the journey, leads to frustration with blacksmiths accustomed to shoeing animals only for local work.
Tim, did you not explain? We want the old shoe back on. Yes. The old shoe back on this foot, please.
We named her Yabancı, which is the Turkish word for stranger. And we were particularly endeared with that term because people would always stop and point to us in the street and exclaim, "Yabanji."
This ancient port of San Simeon, about 20 miles from Antioch, was to change the entire perspective of the First Crusade, because when the Crusaders were besieging Antioch, they established contact, of all things, with a pirate fleet which came from the English Channel, and it could supply them with food and established essentially a maritime element to the First Crusade. And it probably changed the whole nature of crusading, because at San Simeon they realized that a key to crusading was sea power, and you could avoid that appalling cross-country journey that they had already made to get to Antioch.
From Antioch, the Crusaders marched on into Syria, following the coast road and bypassing the great Arab stronghold of Aleppo. Rising 50 meters above the town, the citadel of Aleppo remains the most imposing of all Arab fortresses. Neither the First Crusade nor any of the Christian crusades which followed it for the next 150 years were ever able to wrest it from Arab control. Secure behind their massive walls, the garrison preferred to watch and wait, still stunned by the crushing defeat at Antioch, and hoping that other Muslim forces would intervene to halt the advance of the Christians. A crossroads for caravans down through the ages, Aleppo was among the richest cities of the Fertile Crescent, and its souk has changed little since the time of the Crusades. Here, the stalls and shops are handed down from generation to generation of the same trading families, and, for all their modest size, have been the foundation of legendary merchant fortunes.
Down there. Down there.
The Syrian border. Tim and Sarah attend to the problem of Zippy's back, slowly healing from the ravages of an ill-fitting pack saddle.
Good boy. Stand. Stand, boy. Stand, boy.
Down there.
Stand.
Stand. Stand.
Good.
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 Stand. Okay.
Good.
Why would it be swelling if there was just blood there?
Whatever it is, he's much calmer.
He requires regular medical attention and a continuing course of antibiotics.
No, I'm not the one that has it. Good. Good boy.
Finish? Well done.
He's good.
Which horse, what name?
They don't. What they give his name is here. Passport?
Do you know the Thatcher? Writing name.
They don't sell by name. They sell by number. They're making. This is
This
15.
number.
Yes, that is right here. That's correct.
After a border inspection, the Syrian vets passed the horses as fit to continue.
I was very optimistic as we entered Syria. I really felt almost as if we turned on our tracks and were heading back into Europe. It was different yet familiar and very pleasant.
In the destructive wake of the Crusader advance, grisly rumors spread of their savage fanaticism. At Marat al-Numan, it was said starvation drove a Christian force to cannibalism, eating the corpses of their enemies. By early July, Zippy's back problems have finally been cured, and Tim and Sarah face the last 500 miles of their journey.
Our route through Syria first took us down the Mediterranean coast, past the extraordinary castles which later Crusaders built to guard the lands which Duke Godfrey and his peers had won. The castle at Markab was impregnable, designed, it is said, to withstand a 5-year siege with its own granaries and underground reservoir still in use.
Today, the Crusader castles of Syria stand empty, imposing monuments to the military technology of another age. Their battlements and defences, much as they were when they were abruptly abandoned by their Christian garrisons 700 years ago. At the neighboring castle of Safita, a congregation of Christian Syrians gathers to celebrate communion in the last chapel still in use within a Crusader stronghold. These Christian Arab communities had little in common with the invading Catholics of the First Crusade. They worshipped the same God, but it was in an exotic and different way.
Although the Crusaders kept marching all the way down the coast, Sarah and I turned inland just short of the Lebanon, as I was not prepared to risk the civil war in Beirut. Instead, we followed the ancient caravan trail through an extraordinary diversity of peoples and places.
At Hama, the Nereus, huge wooden water wheels up to 20 meters in diameter, still turn with the mournful groan that they have made over the centuries.
The Crac des Chevaliers was built specifically to command the old caravan trail up from the coast. It is claimed to be the finest castle the later Crusaders ever built, big enough to hold 4,000 men, with walls 5 meters thick, concentric rings of defense, including an internal moat which was also used to water the horses. It still represents the arrogant pinnacle of later Crusader power.
Like many other of the Crusader castles in Syria, Crac stands on the site of an earlier Arab fortress, besieged and taken by the army of the First Crusade. Like them too, Crac was to remain in Christian hands for barely a century. The expedition's route to avoid Lebanon now turns south to pass through the Syrian capital of Damascus. After 4,000 years of uninterrupted occupation, the city of Damascus retains streets and thoroughfares which would have been familiar to St. Paul. For Muslims, the huge Umayyad Mosque is one of the great centers for their own pilgrimage. Created as a mosque within the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, its vast courtyard paved in cool marble, it stands where a Byzantine cathedral once marked the grave of St. John the Baptist, and its maker, the Caliph al-Walid, intended that it should be a mosque, the equal of which was never designed by anyone before me or anyone after me. The tomb containing the head of John the Baptist is still revered by Muslims and Christians alike, and on a minaret it is said, Jesus will appear on the day of judgment. But in Crusader times, Damascus was to remain a center of Arab opposition to the Christian invaders. Here, Islam maintained its own continuity of faith. On July the 19th, Tim and Sarah arrive at the border with Jordan.
By the time we entered Jordan and passed through the ruined Roman city of Jerash, the noonday heat was touching 40 degrees, and we felt we were in the furnace of the biblical lands.
With less than 100 miles to travel to the final goal of Jerusalem, the closing stages of the long trek will mean a detour through the arid hills of Palestine and crossing the valley of the Jordan River, 400 meters below sea level. Here at the edge of the great deserts that stretch south into Arabia, Bedouin families live as they have since biblical times. For the weary and footsore Crusaders, this experience of the reality of the lands of the Bible must have underscored the immensity of their own sacrifice and achievement. 3 years of armed pilgrimage had brought them to the very cradle of Christendom.
We have arrived at the border between Jordan and Israel, and Sarcho seized in his tracks. Our journey through Jordan has been very, very arduous, and this is the most appalling place to stop.
"43 degrees in the shade, and the burden of Sarcho's advancing years has finally caught up with him. At 15, the oldest horse on the journey, he is seized with cramp. But in the middle of the Islamic Eid holiday, it will take hours to get veterinary help, and Tim knows that time is running out for the expedition as well.
شكوتهم جايزة أبو.
شكرا عفوا غير الطرف غير عارف حبي مثل الناس.
Well, I don't know how you're going to do that. You're just going to carry him. Because he won't walk from here. From here, he's not going to make it straight.
Question is with rest, will a day's rest will
I really do, I think he's beyond a day's rest.
But ask the vet. His advice, but just, I mean, I've never seen him look so awful.
مرحبا كفارة على علمك
Our dilemma was that we only had permission to cross the Israeli border on that one day, and it had to be before noon.
not in his house, they closed his house. He went to visit some relatives and so he will be back in 2 hours.
This is the vet from. This is veterinary doctor
Yeah,
from South.
from South.
Right.
Well, I don't know what we're going to do because we could be waiting here until 12 o'clock, and I think Paul stands out there. Oh, you mean the bridge goes at 1?
But I mean, I can't see the point of getting him across the bridge and walking him all the way up, or trucking him up.
No, I mean, if it's going to be a problem, I think it's better off to stay this side and go
To the horses present and not take Sancho even high. Or the other thing, I have a friend here, Fauzi Aladwan.
Was it that one?
Yes. He has a farm and he can keep the horse maybe better.
It's a very difficult decision. I mean, nobody just wants to climb off from being on board and walk away, but to force him back up this valley on the other side into Jerusalem, it would just kill him.
Sancho is not called upon to climb the last hill into Jerusalem. He will be a gift for a wealthy Arab farmer with estates on the hills overlooking the Jordan River.
No horses have been allowed to cross the Allenby Bridge for the past 7 or 8 years. The transit of all animals is forbidden. Yet with a great deal of goodwill on both sides, we were made an exception. The final crucial 40 miles of that 4,000-mile journey were made possible.
By the time the footsore Crusaders passed Acre, on the coast of what is now Israel, Duke Godfrey and the other army leaders must have realized the bitter truth that a sea journey could have avoided the rigors of that terrible overland march. Their weary army had taken nearly 3 years to come within striking distance of the Holy City. Future generations would enlarge and fortify ports, like Caesarea. Here, fleets of reinforcements would arrive from Europe to hold the lands that the First Crusade had won with such sacrifice. Untold thousands of men, women, and children had perished of disease, battle, starvation, and sheer exhaustion. Inland, a network of forts and castles, like the stronghold at Banyas, would have to be built to control the vital access through the mountains and deserts. Today, those same fortifications still fulfill their military function. In the last week of July, Tim and Sarah ride up from the shores of the Dead Sea and through the barren hills of Judea. They have been 8.5 months in the saddle.
It is recorded that when the pilgrims of the First Crusade laid eyes on the city of Jerusalem, they were so moved that many stood with tears streaming down their faces, and others knelt and kissed the dusty ground.
The Dome of the Rock, built over the spot from which Muhammad ascended to heaven, was to witness the First Crusade's fanatical climax. Here, the Muslim population of Jerusalem took refuge as the city came under wave after wave of Christian assault.
They set about besieging Jerusalem in the most illogical way of all, opposite the strongest point of the defences in the citadel and the well-defended southern wall. And as the siege progressed, Godfrey gradually, in fact, concentrated on the northern wall, and it was there that after 5 weeks of siege, the successful assault took place. They burst into the city and they headed for the Dome of the Rock, where there was gold and silver and treasure, and that they looted extremely thoroughly, as well as, it is said, massacring all those who had taken refuge on the Temple of the Mount. It said that the city streets ran with blood as for 3 days the Crusaders pillaged Jerusalem. Why the massacre took place is very difficult to ascertain. My own guess is that it was something to do with the fact that this was the culmination of 3 years of real suffering. And it was not until that sort of bloodlust had finished that they gathered together and went to the main purpose of the whole of their journey, which was to return the holy places, in particular the Holy Sepulchre, to Christian control.
Built over the site held to be the place of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is in the custody of many different branches of the Christian faith: Catholics, Greeks, Armenians, Syrians, Copts, and Ethiopians. To complete their journey, Tim and Sarah enter Herod's Gate to climb the Via Dolorosa to the site of the crucifixion. The Arab quarter of the old city is shuttered and silent, observing the Palestinian Intifada.
As a historian, certainly I find the parallels rather obvious from time to time. Crossing the Jordan River and coming through the Israeli defenses, which are extremely sophisticated. There's a great ditch down there which stops presumably tanks coming. We saw a similar ditch outside a Crusader castle in Syria. We heard that the president of Syria has a picture of Saladin's great victory on the walls of his study when President Assad of Syria thinks of himself as the new Saladin to drive out the Israelis. Perhaps an Israeli soldier standing on the battlements of Jerusalem looking down on sentry duty is not much different from a Roman legionary on the same point of the battlements looking down into the same quarter of the city 2,000 years ago. I prefer to look at the other side of it and say that what we did with the horses, the way we traveled, the way that we never had any trouble from ordinary people, and indeed that officialdom, which is apparently daggers drawn with a next door state, officials, high officials on both sides of an antagonistic border, would speed us on our way, would help us, and would like what we were doing. I think perhaps that's more in keeping with the spirit of the journey that we made.
Just 1 year after he was elected by the Crusaders as their ruler of Jerusalem, Godfrey of Bouillon died in the Holy City, worn out by the exertions of his journey. Godfrey's name passed into legend, but the success of his crusade changed the course of history, and its effects echo to this very day.